Imagine waking up and realizing the world around you is changing faster than you can keep up. The way people make a living, where they settle, and who controls trade are shifting rapidly. Between 1713 and 1800, Canada saw major economic and social changes that shaped the country's future. The fur trade, Loyalist migration, farming, and the timber industry all grew, creating new opportunities for some, but also bringing challenges for others. These changes affected Indigenous nations, Metis communities, French and British settlers, and newly arrived Loyalists in different ways, sometimes leading to cooperation and other times causing tension. One of the biggest economic forces of this time was the fur trade, which had been driving European expansion in North America for over a century. By the late 1700s, competition between the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company was heating up. The Hudson Bay Company, which had British backing, controlled trade in the Hudson Bay region and preferred Indigenous trappers to bring furs to their trading posts. Meanwhile, the Northwest Company, founded by Scottish and French traders, had a more aggressive approach. They traveled deep into the interior to trade directly with Indigenous nations. This meant that the Northwest Company built stronger relationships with First Nations and the emerging Métis population, who became vital middlemen in the fur trade. But as both companies pushed further west, they overhunted beaver populations, causing shortages and disrupting traditional Indigenous economies. At the same time, Canada was experiencing a wave of new settlement. After the American Revolution, from 1775 to 1783, thousands of Loyalists, people who had stayed loyal to Britain, moved north. These Loyalists were given land, mostly in what is now Ontario and the Maritimes. But much of this land was already home to Indigenous nations, who had no say in the matter. The British government signed treaties to obtain land for Loyalist settlers, but these treaties were often unfair and did not fully respect Indigenous land rights. The arrival of Loyalists also changed the balance of power in Canada. Before this, most of the population had been French-speaking, but now there were far more English-speaking settlers, which would later affect how the country was governed. As more people settled in Canada, new industries grew. Agriculture expanded, especially in Upper Canada, now Ontario, the St. Lawrence Valley, and the Maritimes. Farming was crucial because people needed food, and surplus crops could be sold or traded. However, not everyone had equal access to good farmland. Wealthy settlers often got the best land, while poorer farmers, including Black Loyalists, were often forced onto rocky, unfarmable plots. Meanwhile, the timber industry was also taking off, especially as Britain needed wood for shipbuilding. Logging became a booming business in New Brunswick and Quebec, creating jobs but also leading to deforestation, which affected Indigenous hunting lands and waterways. One of the most significant social changes of this period was the rise of the Métis people as a distinct group. As more French and Scottish fur traders formed families with Indigenous women, the Métis developed their own culture, language, Michif, and way of life. They became essential to the fur trade, acting as voyageurs, interpreters, and traders. Métis communities emerged in the Great Lakes region and the prairies, blending Indigenous and European traditions. However, as Canada developed, Métis land and rights were often ignored by colonial governments, leading to conflicts in the future. All of these social and economic changes shaped Canada in lasting ways. The fur trade created wealth, but also led to overhunting and resource depletion. Loyalist migration strengthened British control, but took land away from Indigenous nations. Agriculture and timber industries helped settlers build lives in Canada, but they also led to environmental damage and inequality. The Métis developed a strong cultural identity, but were often overlooked by colonial policies. These transformations set the stage for the struggles, cooperation, and growth that would continue for generations.